The Galactic Council chamber sat at the heart of Nexus Station, a structure so old that the species who built it had been dead for 40,000 years. The walls were black crystal, polished smooth, and they caught the light from 32 different atmospheric sections and scattered it across the floor in colors that had no human names. Every arc of seating was built for a different gravity, a different gas mix, a different pressure. It was the most sophisticated room in the known galaxy, and in it Ambassador Kreth Saul of the Vreth Dominion was about to make the worst decision in recorded history. He stood at the central podium with his 6 limbs folded in the posture his species used when they had already decided something and were only appearing to inform others. His chitin was polished deep red, the color of Vreth authority. His compound eyes scattered cold light across the walls. When he turned his head, he was large, precise, and completely certain of himself. The Vreth Dominion formally announces the annexation of the Outer Rim, territories currently held by the human collective, he said. His translator module delivered the words in clean, standard language. These systems are resource-rich and poorly defended. We have conducted a full assessment of human military capability and found it insufficient to resist Dominion forces. Annexation will be complete within one standard cycle. The chamber went quiet. Not the quiet of agreement, not the quiet of boredom or political calculation, something else. The kind of quiet that falls in a room when everyone present knows something terrible is coming and has already decided they cannot stop it. In the far arc where the Ithori delegation sat suspended in their tank of amber fluid, the eldest speaker moved. The Ithari always moved slowly. They had been in this galaxy for 6 million years, and they had long since concluded that speed was for species who had not yet understood what time really was. The eldest speaker rose from the tank floor in one long, unhurried motion. Her bioluminescent patterns, normally a deep and restful blue, shifted through green and settled on something pale and nearly white. In Ithori body language, that color meant grief. She did not approach the standard podium. She spoke from inside her tank, and the sound system carried her voice to every section of the chamber without distortion. Ambassador Kreth Saul, she said, her standard language was perfect. 6 million years of listening to others speak gave you that. We have a request. The ambassador turned one compound eye toward her arc. The Ithori are always welcome to address the council. We are asking you not to do this. A simple sentence from the Ithori was never a simple thing. They did not speak carelessly. Every word they chose had been considered. Every sentence carried the weight of everything they had seen in their long history, and their history was longer than most species had existed. The human species, the eldest speaker continued, is young. We understand that they are still finding their place among older civilizations. They are sometimes loud, sometimes clumsy, sometimes surprising in the wrong direction, but we have watched them carefully for some time now. She paused. Her pale light pulsed once. They have a quality that we have encountered only twice before in our 6 million years of observation. When they are attacked, truly attacked, not tested or pressured, but genuinely attacked and occupied, they do not negotiate from a position of fear. They do not accept losses as the reasonable price of peace. They do not stop Another pause. The light pulsed again. The two species we observed with this quality are not present in this chamber. Today, they are not present in this galaxy. Their enemies removed them completely. Both times it was the enemy that did the removing. Both times those enemies did not survive. The century that followed, the chamber held its breath. With respect, Crethsol said after a moment, the Dominion has reviewed human military engagements going back 300 standard years. Their conflicts have been local, brief, and poorly coordinated by galactic standards. They maintain 2 active fleet groups and operate on a defensive doctrine. They are a minor species at an early stage of development. The comparison to the Ardith or the Kelorn is they have never been given a reason. The eldest speaker said. She said nothing else. She settled back toward the floor of her tank. Her light returned slowly to its resting blue. Crethsol waited several seconds to see if she would continue. She did not. The Dominion thanks the Ethari for their counsel, he said, and turned back to the full chamber with the posture of a being who had already moved past the conversation. Annexation operations begin in 40 standard days. The council will be kept informed of the transition. He left the podium. In her amber tank, the eldest speaker did not watch him go. She had already begun composing the update she would transmit to the Ethari. Deep archives, the ones maintained outside the galaxy in cold storage, kept for whoever might come after the current age of civilizations. The record was brief. It has begun again. The humans do not know yet. Watch what follows. Remember it. The colony on Kepler 7 did not know any of this. It was an agricultural world, mostly red-brown soil under a pale orange sun, with long flat growing plains that stretch from the settlement ring to the horizon in every direction. The soil grew 3 varieties of grain that did not exist anywhere else in known space. Researchers from 4 different species have been trying to synthesize the growing conditions for decades and kept failing. The colonists found this quietly amusing and did not try very hard to explain it. Some things about a place just worked, and you did not spend too much time asking why. Population was 40,000, families mostly. Farmers, engineers, teachers, doctors. The full quiet machinery of a community that had been growing in the same place for 80 years. There was a small orbital defense platform that spent most of its operational time redirecting meteoroids that drifted in from the outer belt. There were 2 patrol ships that mapped the edges of the system every few months, out of habit because humans like to know what was around them even when nothing was there. It was a Tuesday on the colony calendar. Commander Elena Vasquez was eating breakfast in the operations center when the alert came through her implant as a mild vibration behind her left ear, the kind reserved for priority traffic. She put her fork down. "Talk to me," she said. "Commander, Lieutenant Deoases." Voice came through from the orbital platform controlled flat. Ases got easy and loose when things were fine. He got very quiet when they were not. "We have contacts coming in from the dark side of the outer system, multiple vessels. They are not broadcasting identification signals." Elena was already on her feet. "How many contacts?" "Still counting, Commander. More than 30. The engine signatures a pause. "Commander, I am reading Wraith Dominion Drive profiles, I am certain of it. She left her breakfast where it was. She never went back for it. The next 6 hours were the kind that got stored in the wrong place in memory. Afterward, they should have lived under fear. They went on to work because there was too much of the second to leave room for the first. She moved 40,000 people into the reinforced underground shelters in 4 hours and 12 minutes. The colony had drilled it annually for 60 years, and the time showed. The shelters had food, water, and medical supplies for 90 days. She made sure the children went in first and the soldiers went in last or not at all. She positioned both patrol ships at the edge of effective weapons range and told their commanders to make the Wraith work for every meter of approach. She activated the orbital platforms. Full weapons loadout. She sent the distress beacon through the relay chain. The nearest relay would carry it to the next, and from there it would reach Fleet Command or Earth itself, whichever was faster. Then she went to the orbital platform in person because she had decided that if she was going to watch this, she was going to watch it from somewhere she could actually do something. Through the main forward viewport, the Wraith fleet came in across the dark. Like a slow tide, 43 vessels she counted. The smallest among them was twice the length of her largest patrol ship. They moved in tight formation, the kind her tactical references described as a standard Wraith encirclement pattern designed to cut off every exit. Before the first shot was fired, Lieutenant Asai stood at her shoulder. He was 26 years old and had been wearing a uniform for 4 years. He had never seen an enemy vessel except in training files. "Commander," he said quietly, "what do we do?" "We make them work for every step," she said. The patrol ships opened fire when the Wraith crossed the outer boundary. They burned through shielding on 2 Wraith vessels and left a third running on reduced power before both ships were overwhelmed and destroyed. The orbital platform fired until its main capacitor array burned out from sustained draw. 3 Wraith vessels took significant damage during the approach. 43 ships against 2 patrol vessels and 1 aging platform. But the Wraith had expected nothing. They had expected the defense to fire a warning shot and open communication channels about terms. The math surprised them. It slowed them down by 2 hours. The Wraith landed on the colony surface 8 hours after arriving in the system. They burned 216 surface structures. They left everything else standing, which meant they wanted the colony functional and producing. They put guards on the water treatment centers, the grain storage facilities, the power distribution nodes, the medical building. Elena watched their patrol patterns from inside the maintenance tunnel system that ran beneath the original settlement ring. She had 18 soldiers with her. She had her sidearm, 4 rifles, and 11 days of supplies. She had something else too. Something that the Wraith tactical assessment of human military capability had not measured and would not have known how to measure. She was not frightened. She was focused. There was a difference, and it was the most important difference in the universe. She did not tell her soldiers they were going to win. She did not give a speech about courage or sacrifice or the things worth fighting for. She had known these people for years. They did not need that from her. She said, "We are going to make sure they remember this colony." Over the next 3 weeks, they cut 2 Supply lines, they destroyed 4 of. Vreth communication drones, they hit a fuel depot on the southern edge of the landing zone and took out a surface vehicle. They lost 1 soldier, Corporal Andy Reed, in the second week in a firefight near the Eastern Water Station. 1. Elena sat in the dark of the tunnels afterward and thought about that arithmetic for a long time, what it cost and what it bought. The Vreth had lost 14 soldiers across those same 3 weeks, plus the vehicles and the fuel and the communication infrastructure. They had doubled their patrol frequency. They had stopped moving in groups smaller than 6. They were not comfortable. Good. 3 weeks after the attack, a fleet relay station and the adjacent system received Elena's distress signal. It was flagged highest priority. It went to Fleet Command in under 12 hours. From Fleet Command, it went to Earth Defense Council within the day. From the Defense Council, it went everywhere that had the clearance to receive it, every military branch, every government body, every senior commander. In human space, the message was clear and exact. Kepler 7 human colony, 40,000 residents, occupied by Vreth Dominion military force, colony infrastructure intact. Commander Vasquez and an unknown number of defenders conducting active resistance operations. 11 human systems announced for annexation by the Vreth Dominion. 11 systems. Not a raid, not a border incident, a declaration. The Earth Defense Council sat in session for 9 hours. When they came out, the statement they released was 3 lines long. They had reviewed the Vreth Dominion's declared intentions. They had reviewed the attack on Kepler 7. They had considered the situation in full. Their response was not a diplomatic note. It was not a demand for withdrawal. It was a military mobilization order, the broadest one issued in human history. General Marcus Webb, commanding officer of Fleet Command, read the order and then stood at the window of his office on Fleet Station Meridian for a long time, looking at the stars. He was a careful man. 30 years of service had made him that way. He had seen 2 border conflicts, 1 full engagement campaign, and enough political disasters to know that speed was not always the right tool. But he also knew history. He had studied it the way most commanders studied tactics, not as entertainment or obligation, but as the only honest record of what worked and what did not. He called his senior staff full civilian manufacturing protocols. He said, effective immediately, I want every shipyard in human space at maximum production. I want reserves recalled. I want supply chains running double shifts. He paused. I want a complete fleet inventory in 48 hours. Everything we have active, everything in reserve, everything that can be made ready within 90 days. Admiral Huang, his logistics chief, looked at him carefully. General, the civilian protocols haven't been activated since the last time someone decided our space was theirs to take, Webb said. That was a long time ago. Some species apparently didn't hear how that ended. He turned back to the window. One more thing, he said. Find me the name of whoever gave the order on the Vreth side, the specific individual who authorized the annexation plan. I want that name logged and tracked. He did not turn around. When this is over, we are going to need it. His staff left to begin the work. General Webb stayed at the window a moment longer. He looked at the star field, at the small cold lights of 1,000 systems, some of them human and some of them not. 40,000 people, he said to no one. Then he went to work. On Nexus Station, in her amber tank, the eldest Athari speaker received the human mobilization report on the 12th day. After it was filed, she read it in the slow and careful way her species read everything. She sent a second note to the deep archives. They are moving. The full mobilization has begun. What follows will be unlike anything this current age of the galaxy has seen. Record everything. On Kepler 7, in the tunnel beneath the Eastern Settlement Ring, Elena Vasquez sat in the dark at 3:17 colony time and cleaned her rifle by touch. Her soldiers slept in shifts around her. Above them, through 2M stone and old composite, Vreth patrols moved in their regular patterns, the one she had mapped to the minute over 23 days of watching. The one-way military frequency in her implant had been silent the entire time. At 3:17 it made a sound. 5 characters, a signal code. She had never heard it used in her career. She had only seen it in the oldest training files flagged historical. She knew what it meant. Relief force is moving. Hold position. We are coming. Elena Vasquez pressed her back against the tunnel wall. She breathed once, slowly. Then she pulled out her tactical map and started planning the next strike. Because that was the job. You hurt them every chance you had. You waited. And you made sure that when help arrived, the enemy had already learned, in whatever small and costly way you could manage, what it meant to fight someone who had decided not to stop. High Commander Veth Carroll received the progress report from the Outer Rim operation on the 42nd day after annexation began, and he was pleased. 6 colonies secured, 11,000 Vreth soldiers deployed, minimal resistance beyond the initial contact engagements. Resource extraction beginning on schedule at 4 of the 6 sites, local populations contained and compliant. The only ongoing issue was a minor insurgency at the Kepler 7 site, where a small group of human military personnel had been conducting disruption operations from concealed positions. Nuisance-level activity. Local commanders had increased patrol presence and expected resolution with it. The week, he read the report in the command center of his flagship, the Dominion's Voice, as it held position above the 3rd secured colony. Through the main viewports, the pale green curve of the planet filled half the sky. Down there, human farmers were back at work in their fields under Vreth supervision. The processing centers were running. The grain shipments had begun. It was going exactly as the strategic projections had said it would. The human species, the projections had explained, was not a serious military threat at this stage of their development. Their technology was functional but not exceptional. Their organizational structures were inconsistent across their various governmental bodies. They lacked the unified command hierarchy that characterized more advanced militaries. They were, in the assessment of the Dominion Strategic Division, a species that would respond to overwhelming force with a period of protest, diplomatic pressure through the Galactic Council, and eventually a negotiated arrangement that would leave Vreth control of the Annex systems intact while offering the humans enough face-saving language to accept the outcome. It was a standard playbook. The Dominion had used it 11 times against other species. It had always worked. High Commander Vreth Carroll read the report, noted the projected completion dates, and went to dinner. The week passed, then another. The Kepler-7 insurgency did not resolve. It got worse. The patrol that went to investigate the burned-out fuel depot on day 48 was ambushed in the approach corridor. 6 soldiers wounded too severely. The ambush point was a position the patrol had passed without incident 7 times. Before, the humans had waited, mapped the routine, and then changed their method entirely. The communication relay on the western plateau went dark on day 51. When the repair team arrived, they found the hardware had not been destroyed. It had been disassembled and removed, every piece of it down to the mounting brackets carried off by hand into the surrounding planes. On day 55, a supply shipment meant for the northern garrison simply stopped arriving. The transport route had been operating without problem for 3 weeks. When scouts checked the road, they found 17 separate points where the surface had been treated with a chemical compound that ate through vehicle undercarriages on contact. The compound had been applied at night over 2 separate nights, working quietly across a 40 km stretch. The local Vreth commander, Sub-Commander Draft Vale, sent 3 urgent reports to the flagship requesting additional forces and a change in tactical approach. He described the situation with the careful language of a professional who did not want to admit that a group of 19 humans, his most recent count of the estimated resistance size, was systematically dismantling his operational capacity. Vreth Carroll sent him 2 additional patrol units and a note reminding him that efficiency was expected. He was not worried, not yet. Elena Vasquez lost her 2nd soldier on day 46. Private Tamas Herrera, 22 years old, from the colony's 2nd generation of families. He had been born on Kepler-7. He had never been anywhere else. She held the accounting of him in her mind the same way she held all the other numbers. The tunnel was not a place for grief in the open, and she was not built for grief in the open anyway. She kept it somewhere interior where it would be waiting for her when she had time for it later. When this was done, they were down to 16 fighters now. Of those, 4 had injuries that reduced their effectiveness, 2 with untreated infections, 1 with a fracture that had been set but not properly healed, 1 with hearing damage from a close explosion. She was running low on medical supplies, low on charge packs for the rifles, and she had been wearing the same uniform for 46 days. What she was not running low on was information. She knew the position of every Wraith patrol on the surface within a 2 km radius of the tunnel system. She knew their rotation schedules, their response times, and the 3 gaps in their coverage that they had not yet found or fixed. She knew which guards were alert and which were not. She knew the shift change happened 4 minutes late on average every 3rd night, which was 4 minutes of open ground she could use. She also knew from the signal traffic she was intercepting on the military frequency that other human colonies in the annex systems had not gone quietly either. The resistance on Meridian 4 had destroyed a Wraith landing bay. The underground network on Harvest Station was feeding real-time Wraith troop movement data to fleet relay points somehow. On Calloway's world, a group of civilian engineers had converted a mining excavator into something that the Wraith were now describing in their communications as a significant ground-based weapons platform, which Alina found deeply satisfying. The Wraith had taken 6 colonies. The Wraith had also acquired 40,000 problems per colony, and the problems were organized. On Earth, the civilian manufacturing protocols had been running for 30 days. The effect was not dramatic to look at. It was not a fleet of warships launching at once in a fire of light. It was quieter and larger and more relentless than that. It was every orbital shipyard running second and third shifts. It was every automated materials processor on every settled human world locked into supply chains that fed one purpose. It was engineers and production managers and logistics coordinators working problems in rotation around the clock, finding efficiencies, removing bottlenecks, moving faster. Human beings, when they decided something needed to be built, were extraordinary builders. Most species in the galaxy understood this about them in the abstract. Humans built beautiful things, their architecture, their technology, their art. It was visible everywhere in the settled sectors. Other civilizations had seen the products and been impressed. Very few had ever watched humans build under pressure, with a deadline, with something real at stake. The pace was different when that was the case. It was 30% faster in the first week, 45% faster by the third week as the supply chains optimized and the workers settled into the rhythm. By the end of the first month, Fleet Command's production estimates were being exceeded by a margin that the projections team revised upward 3 times because they kept assuming errors in the data. There were no errors. General Webb stood in the Fleet Command Operations Center and watched the numbers come in and felt something he had not expected to feel, which was a kind of quiet and uncomplicated pride. How long until the first full response? Fleet is ready, he asked. 60 days, General, Admiral Huang said. For the first one. After that we'll have additional groups ready on a rolling 15-day cycle. Webb nodded. He looked at the star map. The Annex system sat on the far edge of human space, marked in the cold orange color the display used for hostile occupation. 6 colonies, 6 orange marks where green one should have been. Contact the Galactic Council, he said. Inform them formally that human military forces will be entering the contested systems in 60 days. Tell them to advise the Wraith Dominion accordingly. The aide made a note. Should I include a proposal for negotiation, General? The Council has been asking. The Council can ask, Webb said. Tell them there is one condition for halting military action. The Wraith Dominion withdraws all forces from all 6 colonies, returns full control to the original populations, and delivers to human custody the individuals who authorized the annexation operation. He paused. All of them not representatives, not diplomatic stand-ins, the people who gave the orders. The aide looked up from his notes. Wraith won't agree to that, sir. No, Webb said, they won't. He looked at the orange marks on the map. Make sure the message is sent anyway. He said, I want it on record that we asked. The Wraith Dominion's response to the Council notification arrived in 3 days. It was polite, measured, and completely dismissive. The Wraith position was that the annexed Territories were now legally Dominion. Holdings under galactic expansion law. That the human populations were under Dominion protection and care, and that military aggression by Earth forces would be considered an act of war against the Dominion with consequences the Dominion was fully prepared to enforce. They attached a summary of their current military force disposition, presumably to underscore the consequences point. It listed 417 active combat vessels. It listed their positions and their capabilities. It was an impressive document. General Webb's intelligence officer, Commander Priya Salazar, read it twice and then set it down on the briefing table. They're telling us they have 400 ships, she said. Yes, Webb said. And they're telling us where they are. Yes. Salazar looked at him carefully. Do they not understand what that is? They think it's a deterrent, Webb said. She was quiet for a moment. It's a target list. Yes, Webb said, it is. The eldest Ithari speaker received regular reports from her observers stationed throughout the settled galaxy. She reviewed them each day in her tank, in the amber quiet, moving through the data at the pace her people had always used, not fast, not slow, but thorough. She noted the human production figures. She noted the military mobilization scale. She read the general's message to the council and paid careful attention to the specific language of the condition attached to it. The individuals who authorized the annexation operation. Not the Vreth military, not the Dominion government as a whole, specific people. Named people, the ones responsible. She had seen this before, not often. Twice in 6 million years, both times a species had been genuinely attacked, not pressured or tested, but attacked, their people taken, their territory seized, their communities disrupted, and both times the response had followed the same essential shape. First, the wounded species absorbed the initial strike. They did not fold, they reorganized. Then they built faster and harder than anyone had expected. Then they moved. And they did not stop moving until the specific individuals responsible for the attack were no longer capable of being responsible for anything at all. Both times the elder speaker had watched and recorded. Both times she had hoped the attacking species would understand in time what was coming for them. Neither had. She did not expect the Vreth to be different. She hoped for it. Hope was not the same as expectation. On day 63 of the occupation of Vreth, patrol unit on Kepler 7 captured a single human soldier operating alone in the outer fields near the Northern Water Station. He was young, not more than 23, and he had been separated from his unit during a supply run. He had no implants that the Vreth scanning equipment could locate. He was armed with a knife and a sidearm, with a near-dead charge pack. Subcommander Drathville personally conducted the interrogation because, after 63 days of being made to look incompetent by a group of farmers and soldiers in underground tunnels, he wanted a conversation with one of them. The human soldier gave his name and nothing else. He was polite about it. He answered every procedural question. Name, rank, colony assignment, and then simply stopped speaking. He sat in the chair with the same flat attention that the subcommander had started to recognize in humans under pressure, not bravado, not defiance. Just a kind of patient, settled stillness that Drathville found deeply unsettling in a way he could not fully explain. Your situation is not good, Drathville told him. You are alone, your group is small, your resources are nearly gone. A Dominion relief force is arriving in this system within 20 days to reinforce our position. There is no way out of this for you. The human soldier looked at him. He said, there's a fleet coming. Drathville paused. The Dominion relief force? Yes, I just. Not yours, the soldier said. He said nothing else. Drathville reported the exchange to the flagship. He logged it as low confidence intelligence from a prisoner attempting psychological pressure. He noted it was probably nothing, but he filed it anyway because it had not sounded like psychological pressure. It had sounded like someone saying something they already knew was true for no reason other than that the information would be relevant soon. 11 days later, the long-range sensors on the Vreth command vessel above the 3rd secured colony registered a contact, then multiple contacts, then a great many contacts coming in from the direction of human space, decelerating from transit speed in coordinated formation. The sensor officer reported the count 3 times, each time to make certain, before he delivered it to High Commander Vethkel. 208 vessels, the vanguard element of what the signal traffic indicated. Clear's throat was a significantly larger force still in transit behind it. Vethkel stood at the sensor display and looked at the incoming formation. The human ships were not in a defensive formation. They were not arranged to ground or establish a perimeter. He had spent 30 years studying fleet tactics, his own species and a dozen others, and he recognized what he was looking at. They were in an attack formation, not coming to defend their colonies, not coming to establish a negotiating position, coming in at combat speed at a heading that intersected directly with his own ship's positions, with a formation shaped for one thing: engagement. He transmitted to the fleet battle stations. He transmitted to the Dominion homeworld contact with human fleet engaging. He transmitted to the Galactic Council out of protocol. And GT snorts. And GT military action imminent. He did not transmit to the eldest Ithori speaker because he did not know she was watching. She was watching in her amber tank. She read the sensor contact reports as they reached her observer's instruments, and she felt the grief-pale color rising in her bioluminescent patterns again. The color she had worn the day Kreth Saul had stood at the council podium and announced the annexation. She had one more note for the deep archives. The humans have arrived. The Vreth believe this is the battle. It is not the battle. It is only the beginning of what the battle will cost them. We said, do not wake these people. We said this. Remember that we said it. In the tunnels below Kepler 7's surface, Elena Vasquez felt the ground vibrate at 4:12 colony time. Not from fighting, not from explosions, from something descending through atmosphere at high speed, multiple somethings burning in through the upper air on deceleration burns. Human dropships had a specific vibration frequency when they came in hot. She had felt it in training a dozen times. She knew exactly what it was. She stood up. Around her soldiers were already awake, sitting up in the dark, looking at the ceiling of the tunnel as the vibration moved through the stone above them. Is that Lieutenant Osai began? Yes, Elena said. She picked up her rifle. 63 days, she said mostly to herself. The arithmetic of it, what it cost and what it bought. Then she moved toward the tunnel exit. Her soldiers fell in behind her without being told. Outside, through the tunnel's concealed hatch, the sky above Kepler 7 was lit with the bright lines of deceleration. Burns. Dropships coming down in columns, spreading across the landing zones she had already identified and marked and transmitted in her intelligence reports. Weeks ago, the Vreth patrols above her were in chaos. Their communications were a flood of overlapping alerts, scrambled response units, commands that arrived too late and went to positions that no longer existed. Elena stepped out into the open air of her colony for the first time in 63 days. She breathed in. She looked at the sky. Then she raised her rifle and went to work. The 6 colonies were liberated in 11 days. Not recovered, not negotiated back. Liberated in the military sense of the word, by force, through engagement with the Vreth ground forces on each colony. Either captured or driven off-world. Human fleet swept through the annex. Systems in a coordinated sequence that had clearly been planned for weeks, hitting each occupied colony in overlapping strike windows that gave the Vreth no time to consolidate or reinforce between engagements. The Vreth had expected a defense. They had expected humans to fight hard for their own territory and then stop at the border of Dominion space to make demands and establish a ceasefire line. That was how these things worked. You fought, you bled, you found a line that both sides could live with, and you stopped at it. You stopped because going further was expensive and escalatory, and no one benefited from pushing a wounded enemy all the way back to their home systems. Every species in the galaxy understood this. The human fleet crossed the border into Vreth Dominion space on day 12. High Commander Veth Carroll falling back with the surviving elements of his fleet after losing the engagement above the 3rd secured colony, received the news and had to ask his communications officer to repeat it. They have crossed the border, the officer confirmed. Into Dominion space, Veth Carroll said. Yes, High Commander. He was quiet for several seconds. The scope of what that sentence meant took time to fully form. The humans were not setting up a defensive perimeter along their original border. They were not establishing a demilitarized zone. They were not waiting for the Council to arrange talks. They were following. Contact the homeworld, Veth Carroll said. Inform High Command that the situation has changed. The situation had changed. In the Galactic Council chamber, the news produced the kind of reaction that the chamber was not designed for. 32 species talking at the same time was something the acoustic systems could manage. 32 species panicking at the same time was something else. The Doreth delegation sent an emergency motion for an emergency session. The Pelani ambassador demanded a formal statement of human intentions. 4. Smaller species made quiet inquiries through back channels about updating their own defensive postures, not against the humans specifically, but in general, because the general situation had become the kind that made updating defensive postures feel reasonable. The Galactic Council's formal mediator, a calm and deeply experienced Korath bureaucrat named Velshan, sent a priority communication to Fleet Command. requesting an urgent statement of human military objectives. General Webb's response arrived within the hour. It was brief. It said that human forces were engaged in active pursuit of Vreth Dominion military units that had occupied human territory and harmed human citizens. It said that this pursuit would continue until the condition previously stated was met: full withdrawal of all Vreth forces, full return of occupied colonies to their populations, and the delivery to human custody of all individuals who had authorized the annexation operation. Velshin read it 3 times, looking specifically for language that was not there. There was no mention of a ceasefire line, no mention of a negotiated settlement, no mention of territorial concessions or reparation schedules, or the diplomatic frameworks that species typically used when they wanted a war to stop. Just the condition: meet the condition, and the pursuit ends. Don't meet it, and the pursuit continues. Velshin sent the response to the full council and then sat for a long time in her office. She had been mediating for 22 years. She had helped end 4 regional conflicts and negotiate 2 major territorial disputes. She knew what a negotiating position looked like, the way it was worded, the space it left for movement, the signals it sent about what could be traded away. This did not look like a negotiating position. This looked like a statement. She sent a personal message to the Ithori delegation, marked for the eldest speaker's attention. The response came back in 3 words: "We told you." The pursuit into Vreth space was not a straight line. The Vreth fleet did not run together. Veth Karol, to his credit as a military commander, understood immediately that holding formation against a human force that was moving with this speed and aggression was a way to die in place. He split his surviving vessels into dispersal groups and sent them on separate headings, hoping to divide the human response and buy time for the Dominion homeworld to mobilize a relief force. It was a good tactical decision. General Webb had expected it. The human fleet split too, not chasing each dispersal group with equal weight. That would have thinned the force dangerously across too much space, but tracking, grouping, prioritizing. Admiral Huang and Commander Salazar ran the targeting, sequencing from the fleet flagship, working through the Vreth dispersal vectors and assigning pursuit elements with the kind of methodical efficiency that Salazar privately thought looked more like logistics than combat. That was not an insult. That was the point. "They're trying to make us choose," Huang said, watching the dispersal tracks on the main display. "I know," Salazar said, "so we choose all of them in order." They worked the list for 8 hours, adjusting in real time as new sensor data came in, reallocating pursuit groups as Vreth movements became clearer. It was the kind of sustained, grinding, analytical work that required no heroism and made no good stories. It was just math and patience and staying with the problem no matter how complicated it got. 3 Vreth dispersal groups were overtaken and engaged in the first week. 2 more the week after. The remaining groups were either captured or driven deeper into Dominion interior space. The pursuit followed them deeper. The Vreth home world received High Commander Veth Karol's first emergency communication and responded with what Dominion doctrine called a maximum defense posture. Every available military vessel recalled To the home system, every orbital. Platform armed and active, every ground. Installation on full alert. It was an impressive force, the Dominion. Had built it over 400 years of expansion. No species had ever threatened the home world directly. The home world had always been too far away, too well defended, too far behind too many layers of military presence for any enemy to reach. The human fleet had gone through those layers quickly and without stopping. The Dominion High Command gathered in emergency session. They reviewed the military situation with the detached precision of leaders who were accustomed to being the ones doing the reviewing, not the ones being reviewed. They went through the engagement data. They counted the losses. They looked at the pursuit tracks. They sent an ambassador to the Galactic Council with a message for the human government. The message proposed an immediate ceasefire. It proposed the withdrawal of Vreth forces from the occupied colonies. This was already effectively complete, since most of the Vreth ground forces had been captured. It proposed compensation in the form of resource rights in 3 unmapped systems. It proposed a formal agreement with defined borders and a non-aggression framework. It was by the standards of Vreth diplomacy, a generous offer. More than generous, it was the kind of offer the Dominion made when it wanted something to end. The human response came back in 24 hours. The same condition, the same words. Deliver to human custody all individuals who authorized the annexation operation. The council mediator Velshin, carrying the response, stood in the Vreth ambassador's reception suite and watched. The ambassador read it. They want the high command, the ambassador said. He did not say it with anger. He said it with a kind of incredulous flatness, like a person discovering that the floor is not where they expected it to be. They want the specific individuals who gave the orders, Velshin said. Carefully, high command, yes, and anyone in the chain of authorization. That is not how wars end, the ambassador said. I know, Velshin said. No species in this galaxy ends a war this way. I know, she said again more quietly. The ambassador stared at the message for a long moment, then he looked at her. What do they want with them? What happens if we surrender these individuals? Velshin had asked General Webb this exact question. She relayed the answer exactly as it had been given to her. A trial, she said, before the Galactic Council for the occupation of civilian colonies, for the treatment of occupied populations, for the soldiers lost in the conflict, a formal accounting. The ambassador absorbed this, and if we refuse, Velshin did not have to answer. They both knew what the answer was. It was written in the trajectory of every human pursuit element still moving deeper into Dominion space. How do they expect us to simply hand over? The ambassador began. They don't expect you to find it easy, Velshin said. They expect you to do it anyway. She left the message with him and went back to the council chamber to wait. Elena Vasquez had been promoted to colonel 3 weeks after the liberation of Kepler-7. She had been given command of the 3rd Ground Assault Group, 1,100 soldiers and the supporting equipment they needed, assigned to the pursuit operation in Vreth interior space. General Webb had personally attached the new rank insignia during a brief ceremony on the fleet flagship that lasted exactly 4 minutes because Elena had asked him to keep it short. She was not comfortable with ceremonies. She was comfortable with work. The 3rd Ground Assault Group was used for the boarding operations that followed fleet engagements. The close work of taking a Vreth vessel that had been disabled or surrendered, clearing it, securing the crew, finding and preserving intelligence, making sure that the individuals aboard were properly identified and logged. The identification and logging was important. Webb had made that very clear. Every Vreth military officer captured was processed through a chain of documentation that would have looked excessive in a different war. Name, rank, command history, chain of authorization, who had given them their orders and who had given orders to that person. The documentation went to a central records office that Commander Salazar ran with the same methodical patience. She applied to everything. Elena understood what the documentation was for. Not all of it was going to matter. Junior officers following orders, soldiers who had been conscripted, supply and logistics personnel who had kept the occupation running without being in a position to refuse. These people were processed and held and would eventually be released. The documentation showed who they were and what role they played and made clear they were not the target. The target was specific. The authorization chain for the annexation operation, from the field commanders who had carried it out up to the high command that had approved it and the diplomatic corps that had announced it to the council and the intelligence division that had provided the assessment saying it was safe to proceed. The humans were not fighting a war against the Vreth Dominion. They were following a chain of responsibility back to its source. Elena had a list of names on her personal command slate. It had 31 entries. Each one had a status marker. Confirmed captured, confirmed dead in engagement, location unconfirmed, location tracked. She updated it every day, sometimes twice a day as new information came through. 22 of the 31 were now marked confirmed. Captured. 9 remained. Back on Kepler 7, the colony was rebuilding. It was not a fast process. It would not be a fast process. 216 buildings had been destroyed. Some of the water treatment infrastructure had been damaged during the occupation. The grain that had been growing when the Vreth arrived had come in without full harvest support, and a significant portion of it had been lost. But the people were there, all 40,000, in their shelters, and now coming out of them into the light. Elena had gone back to the colony once. For 2 days between assignments, she had walked through the settlement ring and seen what the Vreth had done to it and what her people were already doing about it. They were building, not waiting for external support, not organizing formal recovery committees, not filing the documentation that would eventually bring relief funding from Earth. All of that was coming, and all of that would help, but it was not why they were moving now. They were moving because their home needed to be rebuilt, and they were the people who lived there. She had stood in the ruin of the Eastern grain station and watched a crew of 12 people working with hand tools and recycled materials, moving with the focused quiet of individuals who did not need to be told what to do next. She had thought about Private Herrera, 22 years old, born in this place, never gone anywhere else. She had thought about Corporal Reed. She filed those thoughts in the interior place where she kept them next to all the others. Then she went back to the fleet. She had a list with 9 names left on it. The Galactic Council session that convened on day 90, one of the conflict was the most heavily attended in living memory. Observers from species who had not sent delegates to a full session in decades were present. The authority tank contained not 1 but 3 speakers, which was extraordinary. The authority rarely sent more than 1 representative anywhere on the grounds. That one was enough and more was wasteful. The central debate was about intervention, not military intervention against the humans. No one was proposing that, and not only because no one had the military capacity to make it credible. The debate was about whether the Council should formally demand a halt to the human pursuit on the grounds that it was now a destabilizing event for the entire settled galaxy. Arguments were made. Legal frameworks were cited. The Vreth ambassador, increasingly pale in his chitinous complexion, spoke about proportionality and the traditions of galactic conflict resolution. When he finished, the eldest Ethari speaker asked to speak. The chamber went quiet in the particular way it always did when an Ethari spoke. She said, "We advised the Vreth Dominion before this began not to attack the human species. We were specific. We told them that humans, when genuinely attacked, do not stop. We told them this comes from a quality we have observed twice before in our history. Both prior instances ended the same way." She paused. "The Council is now debating whether to formally demand that the humans stop. I would suggest the Council consider instead what message it sends if it intervenes on behalf of the aggressor against the species that was attacked." Another pause. "I would also suggest the Council consider whether a formal demand is something the humans will comply with." The chamber was very quiet. "They are not stopping because they are angry," she continued. "They are not stopping because they are cruel. They are stopping because there are specific people who chose to attack 40,000 civilian colonists, and those people are not yet accounted for. When they are accounted for, the humans will stop. This is the shape of this particular quality as I have observed it. It ends when the accounting is complete, not before." She settled back. "The fastest path to peace is the one the humans have already described. Deliver the individuals responsible. Do it quickly. Let the accounting happen." The chamber held this for a moment. Then the debate resumed, but it was quieter than it had been. High Commander Vethkaral, in the 3rd week of the pursuit into Dominion space, transmitted a new communication to General Webb directly, bypassing the Council and the diplomatic channels entirely. It was not in the format of an official communication. It was in the format of one military officer to another. He asked what it would take. Webb read the message on the bridge of the fleet flagship standing at the communication station and snorts for a moment. He looked at the star map, at the orange marks of Veth space, at the blue lines of pursuit tracks, at the small clusters of engagement markers spread across the display like embers. He called Aliana on the command channel. "Vethkaral is asking what it would take," he said. "What did you tell him?" Aliana said. "Haven't yet. I wanted to ask the person who spent 63 days in a tunnel what she thinks." There was a pause on the channel. "Tell him the same thing we've been telling them," she said. "The list all Of it, every name on the list, the ones who decided this was a good idea. He'll call it impossible, Webb said. Then the pursuit continues, Aliana said, and eventually they'll realize that what's impossible is making us stop before we have what we came for. Webb closed the channel. He sent the message back to Veth Carroll. The same condition, the same words, the same list. He did not expect the answer to change. He was right. The pursuit continued. And as it continued, as the days accumulated and the tracking data grew, and the human fleet moved steadily through Vreth space, following every dispersal group and every fleeing commander, something began to change in the Dominion. Not in the high command, not in the military, in the junior officers, in the ground soldiers, in the Vreth who had been conscripted and deployed and were now in human custody and being processed through the documentation chain and slowly, carefully being told what they were being held for and what they were not. They were being held for the record. They were not the target. The target was specific, and the humans were still looking for it. And some of those junior officers, sitting in holding facilities and talking to human processing personnel, began to think about the 9 names still on the list. And they began to think about whether they knew anything about where those 9 names might be. Some of them did. Colonel Elena Vasquez received 17 new pieces of actionable intelligence in a single 48-hour period from Vreth. Prisoners who had decided that telling the humans what they knew was the fastest path to the only outcome that made any sense. The list went from 9 to 4, then to 2. She looked at the 2 remaining names. For a long time, one of them was Veth Carroll himself. The other was Ambassador Cressall, the diplomat who had stood at the council podium and announced the annexation. She added a note to both entries, location being tracked. Then she went back to work. Ambassador Cressall had not been to the Vreth homeworld in 11 years. He had spent those years at Nexus Station in the comfortable and well-appointed diplomatic suite that the Dominion maintained there, moving through the social and political architecture of the Galactic Council with the ease of a creature in his natural environment. He was good at diplomacy. He was good at the quiet maneuvering, the favor exchanges, the long view of political advantage. He had spent his adult life learning to read situations and position the Dominion favorably within them. He had read the human situation completely wrong. He knew this now. He had known it since approximately day 15 of the occupation, when the reports from the outer colonies started coming in, and the pattern in them was not the pattern the strategic assessments had promised him. The assessments had said the humans would protest and negotiate. The assessments had said the occupied populations would be manageable. The assessments had said the human military response would be limited by their defensive doctrine. The strategic assessments had been made by people who had studied human history from the outside, who had read the numbers and the force inventories and the diplomatic records, and had completely failed to understand what those numbers were attached to. He had left Nexus Station 14 days into the occupation, which in retrospect had been a useful decision and also a completely useless one, because leaving Nexus Station had not actually solved the problem of existing on a human database. He was on the list. He had known he was on the list from the moment he heard about the list. He was the individual who had stood at the council podium and formally announced the annexation, which meant he was the most visible name on the authorization chain. He was not the highest, he was not the one who had devised the strategy or approved the military operation. He was the one who had been sent to make it public because that was what ambassadors were for. It was an enormous and bitter irony. He reflected that the job he was best at, making announcements in public spaces, was the exact thing that had put his name at the top of a human target list. He was currently on a breath transport vessel in the outer edge of the Dominion's eastern cluster, moving at low speed toward a system that was not in any major database, accompanied by 2 security personnel and a communications officer whose primary job was to monitor whether the humans had tracked them to this position. The answer for 4 weeks had been no. He spent those 4 weeks not eating well, and not sleeping well, and reviewing in extended and punishing detail every decision he had made in the previous 2 years that had led him to a small cabin on a transport vessel in an unmapped system. The annex plan had seemed so clean, so precise, the assessments had been thorough, the strategic rationale was sound. The humans were a minor species with limited capability. The Dominion needed the resources. The risk was low. He had stood at the podium in the most sophisticated room in the known galaxy and made the announcement, and not one part of him had believed it would end like this. The communications officer knocked on his cabin door on day 29. "Ambassador," she said, her voice had the same controlled flatness that Osa had used when Kepler-7 sensors had first detected the Vreth fleet. "I have something on the long-range sensors." He followed her to the bridge. The sensor display showed a contact, small single vessel moving on a heading that intersected with their current position. "Could be coincidence," one of the security personnel said. "Change heading," Krethsal said, 30 degrees off current track. They changed heading. 20 minutes later, the contact adjusted. It was now moving on a heading that intersected with the new position. The bridge was quiet for a moment. "Change heading again," Krethsal said. They changed heading 3 more times. Over the next 2 hours, each time the contact adjusted. The contact was not a coincidence. High Commander Veth Karol had chosen his hiding place better. He had not run toward the unmapped outer systems, which was the obvious choice, and therefore the one he assumed the humans would anticipate. He had run toward the Dominion's innermost systems, toward the most populated and most defended space the Dominion controlled, on the theory that the humans would not push all the way to the center. The theory had been based on the way every previous military conflict in galactic history had worked. For 64 days it held. The human fleet pursued through the outer and middle systems, engaging and capturing Vreth forces, following the dispersal groups, compiling their documentation, running their list down. They took the eastern systems. They took the northern approach. They came from 3 directions methodically, not hurrying toward the center, but arriving there by process of elimination. On day 65, Veth Karol received a report that human vessels had been detected in the Kareth system. The Kareth system was 9 light hours from his current position. He had always known at some level, beneath his professional certainty, that the homeworld's defense posture was not going to be tested. The humans were not coming for the homeworld. They had made this clear in their communications. They were not interested in territory. They were not trying to occupy Dominion systems the way the Dominion had occupied human colonies. They were interested in specific individuals, and those individuals were no longer protected by the homeworld's fleet, because that fleet had been significantly reduced by 11 weeks of pursuit engagements and was now positioned in the home system doing exactly what Veth Karol had spent his entire career avoiding, defending a fixed point instead of projecting force. He sat in his command chair on a vessel that was down to 30% weapons capability and looked at the tactical display and thought about the options available to him. There were in truth very few. He could continue to run, the humans would continue to follow, his vessel would eventually run low on supplies, on fuel, on the small margin of operational capacity that kept it moving. The humans had a fleet in resupply rotation with a logistics chain that reached back to human space. He had one damaged ship in the stars. He could fight, he could bring his vessel about and engage whatever human pursuit element was closest. He would damage them probably, he might destroy them, then the next element would arrive. Because there was always a next element. He could surrender. He sat with that option for a long time. The accounting the humans wanted was a trial, public, formal, conducted before the Galactic Council. Every decision he had made in the Outer Rim operation would be examined. Every order, every outcome, the 40,000 occupied civilians, the soldiers lost on both sides, the soldiers he had lost, the soldiers they humans had lost. He had made the decisions he made because they were the correct decisions within the framework of Dominion, strategy and interest. He had believed when he made them that the assessment was right. He had been wrong. He did not know if being wrong in good faith was the kind of thing a trial could understand. He thought about Elena Vasquez in the tunnels of Kepler-7 for 63 days. He opened a communication channel. The message came to Colonel Elena Vasquez's command slate at 6:30 hours. Flagged unusual by the communications officer because of its origin point. Veth Karol was transmitting from a position 3 systems away. He was transmitting on a frequency designated for fleet-to-fleet communication. No encryption, no conditions, no preface. Just his position, his current vessel status, his surrender terms. The terms were simple. He would not resist boarding. He would provide full documentation of his command decisions. He requested that his crew, 38 personnel, none of them on any list, be released after processing. Elena read it twice. She forwarded it to General Webb. Webb's response came back in 11 minutes. Except go get him. She went. The boarding was not what either side expected, which is to say it was completely without violence, and that absence was strange after 11 weeks of pursuit. Elena's unit came through the airlock of Veth Karol's vessel with weapons drawn in full armor and found the crew standing in the corridor in the posture the Vreth used for formal surrender, 6 limbs folded inward, heads lowered. Veth Karol himself was on the bridge. He was larger than Elena had imagined. From the briefings, the size of Vreth high commanders tended to be somewhat understated in intelligence summaries. He stood with his limbs folded and his compound eyes tracking her as she entered the bridge with 2 soldiers at her back. She stopped 3 m from him. He looked at her for a moment. She let him. "You are Vasquez," he said. His translator module was excellent. "Yes," she said. "The Kepler 7 commander." "Yes." He said nothing for a moment. His compound eyes moved in the slight pattern that Vreth physiology used when processing something uncomfortable. "Your casualties in the occupation." 2, she said. 2 soldiers. He was quiet again. "I have reviewed the engagement records. Your units' operations during the occupation were." He paused. "Effective, more effective than the reports indicated." "The reports were wrong about a lot of things," Alina said. A long pause. "Yes," Veth Carroll said, "they were." She had him processed. She had the crew processed and logged for release. She had the vessel's command records fully extracted for the documentation chain. On the trip back to the fleet flagship, she updated her list. 1 name left. Ambassador Kreth All's transport vessel was overtaken by a single human scout ship on day 31 of his flight. The scout ship was not a combat vessel. It was small, fast, and lightly armed, the kind used for tracking and reconnaissance. It came alongside his transport at matching velocity and opened a communication channel and waited. He sat on the bridge of his transport for a long time without answering. The scout ship waited. He thought about the council chamber, the black crystal walls, the amber tank, the eldest speaker's pale light, and the 3 words she had said, "We told you." He had dismissed it. He had been so confident. The assessments were clear. The numbers were solid. The strategic rationale was sound. The humans were minor. They were young. They would not push back hard enough to matter. He had told himself this because it was what he wanted to be true. He had been the ambassador of the Vreth Dominion to the Galactic Council for 11 years. He had been good at the job. He had represented his people's interests with skill and intelligence and a long view of political consequence. And he had looked at 40,000 human colonists on 6 agricultural worlds and decided they were an acceptable calculation. He understood now that this was where he had made the deepest error, not the strategic one, not the military assessment. The human beings had not been a calculation. They had never been a calculation. They were people in tunnels for 63 days. And they were families in shelters for 11 weeks, and they were children who had grown up on soil that their grandparents had worked, and the humans who came after them with a fleet had known every one of those facts and had not treated any of it as acceptable loss. He opened the communication channel. "This is Ambassador Kreth All," he said. "This is Lieutenant Commander Ashad Ray's human fleet." The voice was calm, professional. "Ambassador, please confirm you are prepared to comply with the boarding procedure." "I am," he said. "Your crew will be processed and released after documentation. You will be transported to the fleet flagship and from there to Nexus Station for council proceedings." "I understand," he said. There was a pause. "Ambassador," the voice said, not in a different tone exactly, but something in it had shifted slightly. "The colony you occupied, Kepler 7. There are 40,000 people there." He waited. "They're all still there," the voice said. "All 40,000. They're rebuilding." He did not know what to do with that information. He did not know what it was intended to make him feel. relief, perhaps, or something else. He thought about it for a long time on the trip to the flagship. He was still thinking about it when he arrived. The Galactic Council received confirmation of Krethal's capture on Day 106 of the conflict. General Webb transmitted a formal communication to the Council within the hour. The condition had been met. All 31 individuals on the authorization list were now in human custody. Human military operations in Vreth Dominion space were suspended immediately, effective the timestamp of the message. The fleet stopped. Not gradually, not conditionally, it stopped. The pursuit elements across Vreth space received the order and held their positions and made no further aggressive actions. They maintained their positions and continued processing their captured personnel and kept their documentation chains running, but they stopped moving. They stopped. The council chamber absorbed this for approximately 3 hours, which was the time it took for the various delegations to verify through their own channels that the human fleet had in fact stopped everywhere simultaneously and was not simply reorganizing for another push. It had stopped. Velshin, the mediator, sat in the middle of the chamber and felt something she had not felt in weeks, which was the possibility that this might actually be over. The Vreth Dominion delegation, now operating under an emergency governing council because the arrested high command had left a significant administrative gap, requested a meeting to discuss the structure of the formal proceedings. Webb's office agreed. The Ithari elder speaker, in her amber tank, watched the communication traffic that her observers were reporting and felt the pale grief color fading from her bioluminescent patterns for the first time in 106 days. She sent one more note to the deep archives. The pursuit has ended. The condition was met. The trial will begin. The humans stopped when they said they would stop. Write this down, write all of it. They did exactly what they said they would do. From the beginning, they stopped when the accounting was complete and not one moment before. She paused, her light pulsing slowly, the amber fluid, and not one moment after. Elena Vasquez was on the fleet flagship when the order to stand down came through. She was in the operations center, updating her command records when the order appeared on the display. She read it. She looked at the list on her personal slate, all 31 entries with their status markers, the last one now marked confirmed in custody. She sat still for a moment. Around her, the operations center was doing the same thing, not celebrating exactly, not cheering, but going quiet in a particular way. The way a room goes quiet when something that has been holding very tightly for a long time can finally let go. She thought about Kepler-7, the red-brown soil, the orange sun, the tunnels beneath the settlement ring, where she had spent 63 days in the dark, the vibration of the drop ships coming through the stone above her. She thought about Reed and Herrera. She held that in the interior place for a moment where she had been keeping everything that needed to wait. Then she went to find General Webb. He was standing at the window of his office looking at the star field. She stood beside him. Neither of them said anything for a while. It's going to be a long trial, Webb said finally. Good, Elena said. The council is going to want it to be thorough. Every decision, every order, every outcome Good, she said again. The Vreth Dominion will have legal representation. There will be arguments about command, responsibility, about the degree of individual culpability. I know, Elena said. Good. Webb looked at her sideways. You want it to be long. I want it to be right, she said. I want 31 people in a room answering for 31 sets of decisions, and I want the whole galaxy watching, and I want the record to be so complete that no one who reads it 50 years from now has any doubt about what happened and what it cost. She looked at the star field. That's what Reed and Herrera deserve. That's what 40,000 colonists deserve, not a quick end, a right one. Webb was quiet for a moment. When this is done, he said, when the trial is finished and the record is made, what do you want to do? She thought about it. Go home, she said, help them rebuild the Eastern Grain Station. They're still working on it. Webb nodded. Outside in the dark between the stars, the human fleet held its position and waited for the next order, which would take them back toward human space, toward the dockyards and the home systems and the worlds they had built, and the people who lived on them. They had come out here for a reason. The reason was complete. They were ready to go home. The trial lasted 4 months. It was held in the Galactic Council chamber, which had hosted negotiations and declarations and diplomatic crises for 40,000 years, but had never hosted anything quite like this. 31 defendants, 31 legal teams, most of them assembled in a hurry by a Dominion administrative structure that was trying to function while still processing what had happened to it. An independent tribunal of 5 judges, drawn from 5 separate species, none of them human, none of them Vreth. The council mediator Velshin served as the presiding administrator. She had not slept a full night since the occupation began, and she did not expect to sleep one until the trial was finished. The proceedings were broadcast on every public communication channel in the settled galaxy. This was not an accident. General Webb and the Earth Defense Council had been very specific about the broadcast requirement when negotiating the trial structure with the Council. The trial would be public, all of it, not summary reports or diplomatic communiques, the actual proceedings. Every testimony, every piece of evidence, every argument made by every legal team. The Earth delegation had objected to this. The Council's legal advisors had suggested it was unusual. Velshin had privately agreed that it was unusual. The human position was simple. 40,000 people had lived this. The least that could be done was to make sure the record of it was seen. The objection was withdrawn. The testimony began with the colony administrators, not the soldiers, not the military commanders, the people who ran the water treatment facilities and the school buildings and the medical centers, the people who had organized the shelter movement in the first hours of the occupation, the people who had kept 40,000 human beings alive and functioning while their colony was under foreign military control. They spoke in order of their administrative role. They described what they had seen from the inside, how the grain stores had been inventoried and removed, how the water rations had been calculated and administered, how the children in the shelters had been told what was happening in language that was honest, without being terrifying, how they had run the colony from underground for 11 weeks and kept it. Together, the tribunal listened without interruption. The legal teams for the defendants made careful notes. 31 people at the defense table sat in the particular stillness of individuals who have had a great deal of time to think and are now listening to the results of what they decided. Ambassador Crethsall sat at the far end of the defense line. He had been given Vreth diplomatic dress. For the proceedings, his katan was still the polished deep red of Dominion authority. He looked exactly as he had when he had stood at this same chamber's central podium and announced the annexation. He did not look like the same person who had made that announcement. The colony administrator of Kepler 7's 3rd District, a woman named Clara Santos, who was 61 years old and had been running water distribution for 20 years, sat in the witness seat and described the 11 weeks of occupation in precise and practical detail. She described the Vreth inventory teams that came through her district every 3 days. She described the 2 children who had developed respiratory illness in the shelters and the difficulty of treating them with limited medical supplies. She described the morning she heard the drop ships coming through the atmosphere and sat on the floor of the shelter and cried for the first time since the occupation began. When she finished, the chamber was quiet. For a long moment, the defendant's legal teams had no questions for her. The military testimony came after. General Webb spoke for 3 days. He walked the tribunal through the mobilization decision, the force deployment, the communications sent to the Vreth Dominion before the fleet engaged. He walked them through the pursuit operation and the documentation chain and the condition that had been attached to the ceasefire from the first day. He was asked by one of the tribunal judges why the condition had been framed that way, why specific individuals rather than a governmental reckoning. Webb took a moment with the question. Because the decision to occupy those colonies was made by people, he said. Specific people who sat in specific rooms and reviewed specific information and decided that 40,000 of our citizens were an acceptable target, not a government in the abstract, people who could have said no, who had access to information that told them this was wrong and who chose to proceed anyway. He paused. The people who made that decision should answer for that decision, not their successors, not their junior officers, them. The judge made a note. And if the condition had not been met, the judge asked if the individuals had not been surrendered, then the pursuit would have continued until they were found, Webb said. Indefinitely. For as long as it took, Webb said. Yes. Elena testified on the 41st day of proceedings. She had not been looking forward to it. She was not a person who enjoyed rooms and formal occasions and sitting still in public. She was a person who fixed things with her hands, and her planning and her patience and testimony was none of those. She sat on the witness seat and she answered the questions the tribunal put to her. She described the 63 days in the tunnels with the accuracy of someone who had lived them enough times that the details were simply facts stored and retrievable. She described the soldiers she had lost. She said their names clearly for the record. She described the decision to keep fighting rather than negotiating and why she had made it. Was it a strategic decision? The tribunal judge asked. The decision to continue fighting rather than seeking terms. Elena thought about it honestly. Partly, she said, strategically. Keeping the Vreth ground forces busy and uncertain was useful. It made them commit more resources to Kepler-7 than they might have otherwise. She paused. But that was not the whole reason. What was the rest of it? They had our people, she said. They had our colony. They had come there and taken it because they decided they could, because they had done the arithmetic and concluded that we were small enough and far enough away that the cost would be acceptable. She looked at the tribunal bench. Directly, I wanted them to understand from the very first day that there was no version of this that was going to be acceptable, that the cost was going to keep coming, that we were not going to find a number at which we would agree to stop. She was quiet for a moment. I wanted them to understand that before the fleet arrived, because I wanted the fleet to come in and find that understanding already in place. The judge wrote something. Colonel Vasquez, another judge, said, "You are aware that the defendants have submitted statements arguing that the occupation was conducted under the framework of Dominion expansion law and that the civilian populations were protected under that framework, that no civilians were harmed during the occupation." I'm aware, Elena said. Do you have a response to that argument? She thought about Clara Santos sitting in a shelter for 11 weeks, she thought. About Reed and Herrera, she thought. About 40,000 people in underground rooms, while someone else inventoried their grain. People lived in tunnels for 63 days. She said children got sick in shelters. Families didn't know if they were going to be able to go home to the places they'd built their lives in. 2 soldiers died. She looked at the judge. Call that whatever legal framework you want. We know what it was. The legal team for 3 of the defendants made objections. The tribunal noted the objections and continued. When Elena's testimony was finished and she was stepping down from the witness seat, she passed the defense table. She did not stop. She did not look at any of the defendants, except at the far end of the table where Ambassador Crethsall sat. She paused. For 1 second, he was looking at her. His compound eyes caught the light in small cold sparks. She did not say anything to him. She did not need to. She walked out of the chamber and went back to work. The verdicts came on the 119th day. All 31 defendants were found guilty of crimes against civilian populations under the Galactic Council's unified code of conduct. The specific charges varied according to each individual's role in the authorization chain. The highest level defendants, the members of the Vreth High Command who had approved the operation, and Ambassador Crethsall, were found guilty on the fullest set of charges. The sentences varied. Junior members of the authorization chain received terms of Dominion civil service, mandatory and supervised, dedicated to the reconstruction support programs for the occupied colonies. Mid-level commanders received terms of confinement. The High Command members received the highest sentence the Council's code permitted: permanent removal from any governmental or military role, public registry as war criminals under Galactic law, and life confinement under Council supervision. Ambassador Crethsall received the same sentence as the High Command members. He heard the verdict in the same stillness he had sat through the testimony, the same controlled quiet of a being who had had 100 19 days to arrive at a state of acceptance. His legal team prepared appeals. He told them to pause the appeals and gave them no explanation. In the months that followed, he would write a formal document not required, not requested, that was entered into the council record. It was a full account of the decision-making process that had led to the annexation plan, every meeting, every assessment, every moment at which someone in the chain could have said, "This was a mistake," and did not, including himself. He did not write it to reduce his sentence, he wrote it because the eldest Ithori speaker had asked him to in a quiet meeting through intermediaries that no one else knew about for several years. She had told him that records mattered, that the deep archives needed complete accounts, not just outcomes, that the purpose of the archive was to teach whoever came next, in whatever age followed this one, and that a complete account from someone who had been inside the decision was more valuable than any external analysis. He had agreed. He wrote 340 pages. The Galactic Council passed the resolution on the 48th day after the verdicts. It was formally titled the Resolution on Civilian Population Security. But within a week, every species in the settled galaxy was calling it by the name it had acquired informally in the first day after its passage. The Human Clause. The resolution did two things. First, it established a permanent legal framework protecting occupied civilian populations under council law with enforcement mechanisms that had teeth in a way the previous frameworks had not. Any military occupation of a settled civilian population for any reason by any species triggered automatic council oversight and a documentation requirement. Second, it added a formal note to the Council's diplomatic registry regarding the human species. The note said in the careful and precise language of galactic legal code that the human species had demonstrated a documented pattern of sustained military pursuit in response to attacks on their civilian populations, that this pursuit was not limited by territorial boundaries or conventional ceasefire frameworks, and that all member species were formally advised to take this pattern into account in their foreign policy and military planning. In the supplementary materials attached to the resolution, the Ithari delegation submitted a historical addendum. It noted that this pattern of behavior had been observed twice before in galactic history, and that both prior instances had ended with the complete removal of the attacking civilization. It noted that in both cases early warning had been provided and ignored. It noted in the careful language of beings who had 6 million years of patience behind them that the purpose of this addendum was to ensure that no future species could claim they had not been informed. The supplementary materials were entered into the permanent record. The permanent record was distributed to every member species. It was also sent to the Ithari Deep Archives, where it was filed alongside the notes the eldest speaker had been making since the day Kreth Saul had stood at the podium. General Webb retired 8 months after the trial ended. The ceremony was held on Fleet Station Meridian, in the same facility where he had stood at the window on the day he read the mobilization order. The same star field was visible through the same window. He stood in front of it and accepted the formal retirement honors and said a short speech that he had written himself, which focused on the logistics officers and the production teams and the relay network operators whose names would not appear in any of the histories that would be written about the conflict. He thanked them by name, every one of them he could fit into the speech. Afterward he went home. He had a house on Earth in a quiet part of the Pacific coast where the mornings were cold and the sea was close, and nothing about the landscape required any decisions. He spent the first week doing nothing. He found that this was harder than he expected. On the 8th day, he started writing. Not a memoir, not a formal account, just notes for himself about the shape of the thing, what it had looked like from his position, what snorts he had understood early, and what had taken time to understand, what he would do differently and what he would not change. He wrote on the 3rd page of the first notebook, the condition was the key. From the first communication we sent, we told them exactly what it would take to stop us. We were never vague about it. We said these names, these people, this accounting, and we meant it precisely. And we held to it precisely. There was no ambiguity for them to negotiate around. There was no number we would settle for. The condition was the condition. He thought for a while. Then he wrote, I think the scariest thing for them was that we were not emotional about it. We were not angry, the way that species sometimes get. Angry, hot and fast, and eventually cooling. We were just steady. The fleet moved steady. The documentation ran steady. The list got shorter. Steady. Steady is harder to argue with than angry. Steady doesn't have a breaking point you can look for. He closed the notebook. He went to the window and looked at the Pacific. On Kepler 7, the Eastern Grain Station was finished in the spring of the 2nd year after the occupation. It was better than it had been before. Larger, with better equipment, with a storage system that could handle 3 times the previous capacity. Architects had done what human architects tended to do when they rebuilt something. They had made it better than what they were replacing. Because if you were going to do the work, you might as well. Alina was there the day they opened it. She was not in uniform. She had taken a leave that had gradually extended itself into something that did not have a clear end date, which she had been told was acceptable and which she suspected was a gentle way of saying she did not have to go back unless she wanted to. She did not know yet if she wanted to. She stood in the wide door of the new grain station and watched the first delivery come in from the eastern fields, the big automated harvesters moving across the red-brown soil in the low orange light of the afternoon. Around her, the colony moved at its regular pace, the sounds of rebuilding still present but softer now, less urgent, more like finishing touches than reconstruction. Clara Santos came and stood beside her. They had met 3 weeks earlier at the small memorial the colony had built for the people lost in the occupation and the resistance. 2 names on it. Alina had stood there a long time. Good station, Clara said, looking at the building. It is, Alina said. Better than the old one. Yes. Clara was quiet for a moment, watching the harvesters. Are you going back to the fleet, I mean? Alina thought about it. She had been thinking about it for months without arriving at a clean answer. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Clara nodded. The colony administrator position is open, she said. 3rd district, actual position, not temporary. I mention it only because the last person who held it moved on, and we haven't found someone we like. Elena looked at her sideways. Clara shrugged. You know the tunnels better than anyone. That's roughly the same skill set. Elena laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes out of somewhere unexpected. The kind that surprises you and then feels like something you needed. She looked at the grain station, at the fields, at the red-brown soil in the orange afternoon light. She had been born somewhere else. She had come here for an assignment and stayed for the work and then stayed through the worst thing this colony had ever experienced, in tunnels for 63 days, holding a piece of something that needed holding. She did not know when she had started thinking of this as home. She thought maybe it did not matter, when only that she did. I'll think about it, she said. Clara nodded once, satisfied, and went back to her work. Elena stayed in the door of the grain station and watched the harvesters come in from the fields until the light changed and the first stars came out over the flat plains of Kepler 7. The small, cold lights of the galaxy spread across the dark above a world that had been taken and had been gone back, a world where 40,000 people were still exactly where they were supposed to be. The eldest Ithori speaker's final public statement on the conflict was brief. It was delivered to the council and entered into the record and distributed to every member species, and it said, humans did not want this war. They did not start it. They did not seek it, and when its purpose was achieved, they stopped it completely and precisely when they said they would. They held to every condition they named. They pursued to the end they defined, and not one step further. If you take one lesson from this record, let it be not that the humans are dangerous when provoked. Let it be that they are precise. They told the Vreth Dominion what would stop them. The Vreth Dominion chose not to believe them. This is the error. It is the only error that mattered. She paused. Do not make it again. The record was filed. The deep archives received their copy. The settled galaxy moved on as it always did into whatever came next. But the human clause remained in the registry. Every new species that achieved space flight and applied for council membership received it in their orientation documentation. Some of them read it carefully. Some of them read it and did not fully understand the weight of it. The Ithari supplementary materials helped with that. The historical addendum, the two prior examples with their full records, their warnings, their outcomes, and appended at the end in the simple and direct standard language that the eldest speaker preferred. You have been told you cannot later say you were not. Do not attack the humans. They never let their enemies escape.